Our presenter tonight is Gabriann Hall. She is the granddaughter of Marilyn Mitchell Hall, who was a survivor of Canyonville Bible Academy in Oregon and Haskell Indian School in Lawrence, Kansas. She is the daughter of Lawrence and Ann Hall from Fort Klamath, Oregon. She is an enrolled member of the Klamath Tribes and volunteers with the tribe on education-related issues. She was born and raised in the Fort Klamath Valley and attended school in Chiloquin, Oregon. She then went to Oregon State University, where she received a Bachelor of Science in Ethnic Studies, Master of Arts in Interdisciplinary Studies, and later a Master's of Arts in Teaching. She currently resides in Central Oregon and teaches Ethnic Studies and Native Studies at Central Oregon Community College. Teaching diverse history is a passion of hers. She believes that understanding the impacts of the past on the present is instrumental to successfully navigating the world today. So please join me in welcoming Gabriann Hall.
Waklisi, Musap Ketcha, Gawasasis Gabriann. Welcome and thank you for being here. Like she said, my name is Gabriann. And I took on a pretty big task. I tried to boil down an extremely complex topic of water into a 1-hour presentation. And I wanted to do justice to this presentation, but I want you to know that we are just skimming the surface of water. Water is instrumental to our lives in so many ways. So please don't think that I succeeded in covering the broad topic of water. I did not. But this opening slide is of Klamath Lake, and that's where I come from. And like Paige said, this is my grandma, Marilyn Mitchell Hall. And these are my parents, Lawrence and Ann Hall. That's who I come from. Where I come from is the former Klamath Indian Reservation. This is a picture of my parents outside my parents' living room window. And we happen to live on some sacred ground. Right here is where the Treaty of 1864 was signed. This is Council Grove on the Crooked Creek. And the Treaty of 1864, it was called the Treaty of the Lakes. And that's because we are the mucklucks of the Ambo. We are the people of the water. Water really defines who the Klamath tribes and the Klamath people are. And so that's where I come from. And like Paige said, I'm an enrolled member of the Klamath Tribes, but I never speak for all Native people. I don't speak for my whole family, nor do I speak for my whole tribe. These reflections are just my opinions on different things. And I hope by hearing the voices and the perspective of Natives throughout this conversation, that you're able to leave with maybe a broader lens than you came in with. And I tried to do that by covering multiple different topics. And when we talk about place, I think our connection place to place is always important. And it doesn't matter where you're at in the United States, you're on ceded land of some tribe. And so specifically where we're at today, you can tell by looking at the two maps, we're kind of smack dab in the middle of the former ceded lands of the Klamath tribes, this red line, and of the Warm Springs tribe, that red line. And so you were on ceded land. If you're in Redmond, that's definitely Warm Springs. But if you're here in Bend or South, that's probably Klamath land. I'll go ahead and say, yeah, that's Klamath land. And so I think it's important to acknowledge where we're at. And something I want to take note of today is the treaties. And both Klamath and Warm Springs, the Warm Springs Treaty is called the Treaty of Middle Oregon, signed in 1855. Both of those treaties in Article 1 have this line or something similar to it. And we are retaining our ability to hunt, gather, and fish. And it's very important for us as Native people to let people know the government did not give us that ability. We refused to give that up because it was so intensely tied to our lifeways, our culture, our ceremony, that is in Article 1 of almost any treaty that you find, because that's how instrumental that is to our survival and our lifeways. And so this line right here is getting a lot of play in our current issues, and I'm going to tell you why. But remember that the foundation started for Warm Springs in 1855 and for the Klamath in 1864 in our treaties. And I always think it's important when we cover a big topic is to kind of ground ourselves in the culture. And one way that we as Native people do that is by storytelling. And so today, I'm going to take us from our northern border of the Columbia all the way down to our southern border on the Klamath. And I want to start with the creation of the Columbia. And so we're going to start with a story about Coyote. You see him a lot in Native storytelling. And so one day, Coyote was walking along, and it was a hot day. And Coyote's got on a fur coat, so he's really warm. And he says, "Creator, it's so hot. Can I just have a cloud?" And a cloud appeared. And so Coyote's walking along, and he's like, "Oh, it's still hot. Creator, can I just have a little bit of rain?" So a little bit of rain starts to fall. And Coyote's still walking along. He's like, "Oh, if I could just have a little stream to put my feet in." So he says, "Creator, can I have some rain from this cloud?" And it starts to rain a little bit, and a stream forms. So Coyote's walking along through the stream, but he's still hot, and he's kind of ungrateful. He's like, "Creator, can I have more water?" And Coyote's walking along, and a huge gust of water comes through this humongous river that sweeps Coyote up. And Coyote almost drowns. He's barely able to make it to the edge. And that huge gust of water that came through was the Columbia River. And it washed Coyote up and almost drowned him. And Coyote makes it to the edge. And he survives that. But there's two lessons that Coyote taught us. One, be thankful for the moisture. Be thankful for the rain. And two, don't be greedy. And that's how the Columbia was made. And so I think we need to take both of those lessons and instill those in us. Oral stories are used in the Native culture to instill values in our children and our families. And I think if we take those lessons that Coyote taught us, that we can learn from both of this. One, always be thankful for our moisture. Even though we haven't even got our first fake spring here in Central Oregon yet, where we get all excited, kind of happened today, but we need to be thankful for every time that moisture comes. And then we need to not be greedy. But what happened with that great Columbia River is it was able to sustain multiple tribes. And those are known as the Columbia River tribes. And one of those were the Wasco and the Warm Springs. And this image right here is Celilo Falls. And that was one of the most prolific trading grounds in all of North America. They have found arrowheads from Celilo Falls, from Glass Butte right here in Central Oregon, all over the United States, all the way back on the East Coast and all the way down into what would be Mexico and South America. That's how prolific these trade routes were. And this, where Highway 97 was actually the Klamath Trail that allowed for a lot of trade up throughout this area and into Alaska and British Columbia. And so, and a lot of what anchored that trade place was the fishing here that you see. But in 1957, the Dalles Dam was put in, and the Great Celilo Falls was flooded. And so something that I want you to think about throughout this presentation is a lot of decisions regarding water are made with the best of intentions. But a Native perspective is that we always think 7 generations ahead. So let's think of every decision we make regarding water. And if we think that out 7 generations, would we make that the same decision? Native Americans have a saying that this earth and this land is not ours. We borrow it from our grandchildren. If we just thought that far ahead, would we make different decisions? Maybe we would. I believe that we would. And I think sometimes we have to question our place in this system when we have rivers such as the Columbia that create places like the Columbia Gorge, or where water has created someplace like the Grand Canyon. And now that water can be controlled by somebody with a push of a button sitting at a desk. Should one person have that much power to control these systems that have been forged over millions of years? And I'm not saying it's wrong or it's right. I'm saying maybe we should question the power and what we have done to water. And when we look at these systems throughout our federal government, state government, local government, all the way down to, our irrigation district, we have people that decide what's going to be done with the water all the way down to the last drop, down to water allocation. And my question is, any scientist, when you look at these formulas, they can tell you, oh, this person gets this much per cubic meter second, all these, they have it all figured out. But what nobody controls is the biggest X factor. And that's how much water comes. So we have it all figured out, yet we have zero control on what water comes into our system. And so if anything, I think that should be a red flag to us telling our place in the system as a whole. Is it really our place to allocate everything and plan everything out when we have no control over the biggest thing coming into our system, which is the amount of water we have? And something I wanted to make sure that you were familiar with is those treaty rights and how they keep coming to fruition today. And you may pass by something like this on the Columbia. This happens to be on the Deschutes near Maupin, but these are fishing platforms. And the Warm Springs Treaty says that the Warm Springs tribes can fish in their usual and accustomed places. Because during treaty making time, a river was a place that everybody wanted to live next to. So Native Americans were frequently removed from rivers and put into different areas. And so the Columbia River tribes, such as the Yakima, Warm Springs, Umatilla, Nez Perce, they were all removed off the Columbia. Yet they made sure that their treaties said that they could always fish in their usual and accustomed places. And they also have another line in there. They can use fishing with traditional means and methods. That's why they fish on the Columbia with dip nets, why they have platforms. And in 1974, there was a big to-do about fishing in the state of Washington. Literally, people were fighting. Marlon Brando got arrested. It was a big deal. And they were having fish-ins, and Judge Bolt from the circuit courts in Washington said, I am going to uphold those treaty rights. They get to fish in their usual and accustomed places using their traditional means, and guess what? They get 50% of the catch. Oh, everybody was furious. Supreme Court agreed with him in 1979. So that was the first time that our treaty rights were challenged and we won. And that case still holds true. So that 50% mark, nobody's come back and said, do we now get 50% of the deer population? But they could. Case law is set. That's the precedence. And so that's an important decision. And when you drive by and you're like, oh, why did they get a gill net? And it's because they have a treaty right. And I never want people to think that, oh, they just get that. No, their ancestors died for that right. And so I want you to know where that comes from and why. And when we talk about this big topic of water, I think it's easy to simplify it. And I love this quote by Bridget McConnell from the Warm Springs tribe. She said, water is a living entity, not a resource but for extraction. And I think too frequently we look at it as a resource, even as a property right. And we can't break water down to that simplest form. And I think Native people look at water with such respect because of the way water treats them and the way we treat water, and also for what the water holds. And I wanted to bring multiple different voices into this conversation. And so I'm going to start with an elder from Warm Springs. And his name is Louis Pitts. And he tells this story through Confluence. They teach Native American history. And this is actually done by a Klamath descendant, Woodrow Wilson, created this film. And I want to share what Louis says about the salmon and our responsibility to them.
Yeah, one day I was up there, I saw that. Probably my 20th, 30th time I'd seen this scene before where an old hen, female salmon, I just sat down on a stump to watch this fish, the salmon. And the two bucks were already dead. There was a third one probably down below, a 3-to-1 fecundity ratio we learned in fisheries. And anyway, this hen, the mother of this red, about 10 feet long and maybe 5 feet wide, a nest where the eggs were planted that she planted, and then those three guys, 3 bucks, fertilized. Well, to her, what I thought was her last breath, when I got close to the red, she came up and tried to get in my way. No, don't. Then she dropped over and float down the river. Then she'd come back up and try to defend her nest again. Then finally, for the last time, she floated down and she didn't move. Oh, for some reason or another, that really got to me. I cried for maybe 20 minutes, and the question really was, am I doing enough in my life? Then are we doing enough? And so, because that lady gave it everything she had, and really drives me that for a while I understood the real spirit of that fish that just died before my eyes, but their last movements were to protect her future.
So Louis asked the great question, are we doing enough? And I think the tribe as a whole needs to answer that question, because remember, the tribe's in a special spot. They have those treaty rights that need to be guaranteed. If there's no fish in the stream, then the treaty right's not being fulfilled. But I think we can take Louis' question to, are we doing enough? And we can all answer that in our own lives. And I have to say, for the state of Oregon, Warm Springs is truly leading the way in restoration projects. This is from their Fish and Wildlife Department webpage. This is a 104-page report just on their watershed restoration on the John Day River. And in the name of creating better habitats for the salmon, which are a first food and a subsistence food for their people, they are restoring water throughout the Columbia River Basin and habitat. And they're doing it in a magnificent way. They're doing it by finding common denomination with the people around them. Because a farmer, everybody's like, oh, farmers and Indians, they're always at different junctures. No. When the water table's raised for the salmon, it creates better nutrients to the ground for the farmer. And so they're finding common ground amongst people in their communities to do amazing projects. They're also partnering with people like Bonneville Dam. You know, if anything, Warm Springs could be very upset with, you know what, you took our sacred place of Slilo Falls. But you know what? They're saying, no, let's work together. We know where we're at now. Let's build up these streams and let's do something wonderful. And I have some links at the end of the presentation that show how successful they've been in doing that. And one of the things I think they keep at the forefront of their work is that it's not just what the water nurtures that's important. It's not just for the fish and the people and the animals and the environment, but water is more. And for Native people, water is used in ceremony. It doesn't really matter where the tribe is, even if they're not a water tribe. Like, I consider our people to be water people, but Plains tribes have water ceremony. And you see people referred to as water protectors. And so water is instrumental. This is something that one of my cousins and tribal elders said, is water is forgiveness. It washes things away. Who doesn't need some forgiveness from now and again? And water does that. Water cleanses in a way that I believe nothing else can. On a hot day, does anything feel better than a cold glass of water? No. Like, I'll go up to Billy Chinook and I'll jump in the water, and the first question is, how is it? And I'm like, oh, it's good. But I truly cannot put into words how good it feels to jump into that lake on a hot day. Words, there's just nothing to describe it. That's the power of water. And I think we take it for granted, but that's truly how magnificent it is. You know, if you have arthritis and you go to the doctor, the first thing they say is, drink more water. And so I looked up water, and these are some of the remedies that water does. But I put it into my own life experiences. I happen to be a mother of 2 children. And anybody who's ever been pregnant knows you can take no medicine, nothing. Your lower back hurts, every bone in your body hurts. And you can't take an Advil, you can't take a Tylenol. You want to know what I did through 2 pregnancies? I took baths. Baths healed me mentally, physically, and spiritually. It was the water that healed me. And so that's something that we all just would take for granted. But when we're in this modern time of all the medicine that you can imagine, and I turned to water, and that's what made me whole at the end of every day. And please don't tell me I'm wrong. Come September, October, when we've had, indoor recess, when we haven't been able to go outside because it's so smoky, when there's that first rain, does anybody else cry? Nobody cries. I cry. I cry. That rain doesn't just cleanse the land, it cleanses my soul. And my husband, he's from the Middle East, so he's not used to these wildfires. And he saw me crying, and he started crying because that water cleanses in a way that you don't know that you were needing. You don't know that you needed that breath of fresh air so bad that you were literally suffocating without it. That's the power of water. And this is a quote that I love. Water isn't just for drinking or washing. Water has its own spirit. Water is alive. Water has memory. Water knows how you treat it. Water knows you. You should get to know water too. And I think a lot of us kind of top out with the washing and drinking, and we don't go to that deeper level. And that would be my challenge, is to get to know water too, to live in a reciprocal relationship. You give to water and water gives to you. And I think you can do that by thankfulness. Every time it rains or snows, I am thankful, and I practice my gratitude because I'm so appreciative of that moisture in that water. We're going to go down the road a little bit to where I'm from, to the Klamath Lake. And this is a beautiful lake. It doesn't matter when you drive by it, it is gorgeous, unless you hit the midges. Anybody ever driven by Klamath Lake and gotten the bugs? The lake's still beautiful, but there's a lot of bugs. But this is where I call home. And we retained this section of land for a reason. Like I said, we're called the mucklucks of the Ambo. Ambo means in, around, and about water. That's the Klamath word for water. And mucklucks means people. For as long as we can remember, since time immemorial, we have been in and around the water of this area. And these are some Klamath people in their dugout canoes. This one, if you go over to Winchester Bay, do you not see this set up on fishing boats today? And this is somebody in the early 1900s, a Klamath man, with a net set up to go out and go fishing. So, they say, oh, savages. And it's like, no, we knew how to use our resources and to maximize our effort. And here he is in a dugout canoe down, it looks like Agency Lake to me, down in that area. But we reserved this spot specifically because it was so rich in water. This is the Klamath Marsh. It makes up 40,000 acres. That's what you would call a grocery store back in the day. These reeds and tools get so tall you cannot see a herd of elk standing in the middle of them. That's how big and vast this area is. This picture right here is of wokus. And wokus is a traditional and a sacred food for the Klamath people. You see these yellow pods on the top of the lily pad. If you turn that over, there's seeds in there. And you take those seeds and you dry them out. And then you can grind them out, and you say, woksabexa, and it makes a cornmeal. And that was a traditional food for the Klamath, a substance food that would get them through the winter. And there's more wokus than you can imagine down in the marshes and the wetlands in Klamath Falls. There used to be. It's almost extinct now. You go out to the Klamath Marsh today, and it is dry. This is a lady you could go out in a morning. Have you ever had smoke? Have you had wokus? I've never had wokus. Because you can gather it at Lake of the Woods now. You can no longer gather it at the marsh. It's pure protein. And so during a long winter, and this is when you get 5-6 feet of snow, it would take you through the winter. And so a woman could go out in the morning and gather enough wokus to last for a good time because it was just so abundant. And so that's why our treaty signers made sure, one, they reserved a location that was heavy in water, that had a ton of water in it, because that meant resources. And so in our Article 1, again, we reserve that right for hunting, gathering. And then in our Restoration Act, again, we make sure that we have our hunting rights reserved. And when we were terminated, which that's a story for another day, it was those hunting and fishing rights that were the key to getting us restored. And so I want to talk, this is a picture of our most sacred place, Crater Lake. And the water there is considered sacred water. And I want to talk specifically about Crater Lake because when we look at nature's system that it has created, it boggles my mind that science thinks we can improve upon it. So in the snowpack, which is well over 100 inches up at Crater Lake, just like it is up at Bachelor, it creates its own natural reservoir. And when that snow melts, it doesn't matter what time of year it is, it will run off into the streams with cool, fresh water that goes through a wetland and enters the lake. And it technically, the science shows, it does not have to rain during the summer or the fall for there to, not during the summer, the late summer, for there to be enough water if our snowpack is adequate. It doesn't even need to rain and we will be fine. But our snowpack has gone down so much over the last couple decades, we are now in what they call a snow drought. And when we do get a lot of snow, the temperatures are too high that are hitting Crater Lake. And so then the runoff comes in the spring and it fills up the rivers and the creeks. We need the temperature to be low enough so that snowpack stays there and it slowly releases throughout our dry season and we will be fine. But our average temperatures have gone up by a couple of degrees each year, and that impacts how fast that snow melts. That's why we're having dry summers and a mega drought in the fall. And again, we come into this system thinking that we can fix it, but we have no control over how much snow is in that mountain. And then we'll think, oh, we're getting lots of moisture. But if it comes in rain because our average temperatures are too high, it's not creating that natural reservoir in that snowpack. And so even if we get a lot of moisture, if it's not the right moisture, meaning snow, at the right time, it impacts our whole entire system. And that's something I want you to take. When I say water is complex, if you pull one little piece of water out, it impacts the whole entire system. And to think that we can do that without having some unknown ramifications is just inaccurate. And so water rights have become a huge issue. And the Klamath tribe has been in litigation since 1976. And we have been affirmed as our senior water rights holder twice. I called the tribal elder this week because I said, what if somebody asks me how much more longer litigation is going to go on? And I thought he was joking because he said probably 30 years. And I was like, what? But we've been in litigation longer than I have been born. Is how long we have been litigating water issues in the Klamath Basin. And he assumes another 30 years. And this person knows Klamath water law and water rights. But the tribe has upheld on 2 appeals the superior water right. We were there first. We have the call on the water. And it creates conflict within the basin. And this picture, this is taken in 1905. What this picture shows is these are Lost River suckers. And the Klamath would routinely go down, and the suckers numbered in the millions. We call them Chwaman. And so you could gather as many sucker fish as you wanted, and you would dry them out. And that, with your WOCUS, is what would help you go through the winter. Because you weren't out hunting and gathering in the middle of the winter. And winters weren't 2 months of mild weather. They were half the year. And so these were a subsistence fish that our people ate. And my grandma tells the story. And I know she just tells it half the time just to freak us kids out. But my grandma Marilyn would tell us that they would make a stew because they would dry all the fish and they would be in camp for a long time. She's like, oh, you've never smelled anything like smoked fish for, a month at a time. And so then they would take the heads of the fish and they would make a fish head stew. And she always said, my favorite part was to eat the eyeballs. And we would go, it's so gross. But that was her favorite part, was to eat the eyeballs. But they didn't waste anything. And they would have a lot of heads because they were drying so many fish. But this was one of our subsistence foods. And the Chwaman have been on the endangered species list since 1988. We are down to fewer than 10,000 Lost River suckers. And I had to look up this because, I'm not a scientist, I'm a history teacher. This is an endemic species. That means the Chwaman only live in the Klamath Basin. You can find them nowhere else on Earth. So when the last Chwaman dies, that's the last one in the world. And my cousin works with these fish a lot, and he says these are the toughest fish. They're the bottom feeders. They're the things that clean the rivers and the lakes. And he said, they're tough. Some of them will live 30 to 60 years. And he says, if they're dying, what else is not going to be able to live? They are an indicator species. If the toughest of the tough can no longer survive in our waterways, what is wrong with our waterways. And so nobody's really paying attention. Oh, it's just a sucker fish, you know? That's what people are saying. But it's like when the chwam and the koptu, the strongest fish in the ecosystem, can't handle it, what's going to happen to the rest of the ecosystem? And this is a picture, and it's kind of difficult to see, but I put it in here intentionally because these fish lay their eggs in the stream beds where it's rocky. And you can see how shallow that is. The shallower the water, the warmer the temperature is, the more likely there's going to be an algae bloom. And you can see how shallow that water is. The Klamath Tribes put out a documentary about 2 years ago, and I'm going to have the documentary explain some of the science as to what's happening with these fishes in our water system.
Each year, tens to hundreds of millions of larvae are produced by the chwam and the koptu, and due to lake conditions, they are all essentially dead by the fall of each year. The little ones drift down to the lake. They enter the few remaining wetlands that are available. They then go out to the lake. The lake then has a massive algae bloom, and in the fall, this algae bloom starts to die back. And when that algae dies back, bacteria decompose the algae, absorb all the oxygen from the water, and cause a lake-wide, what we call anoxia, the absence of oxygen in the water column. The younger fish are just generally more susceptible, weaker, and the vast majority of time they can't make it through the summer.
They consistently die every year because the lake dies every year. And it'd be hard to try and reverse all the things done to that lake.
Yeah. You know, they're always under stress here in the lake. Just coming here, it looks like it's so beautiful, unless you really look close and smell the water. If the fish die, the people die. You know, we see the signs, you know, they're getting pretty sick. It's the canary in the coal mine.
So what the chairman does is he continues to talk about the impact on the people and how that fish is an indicator fish. If we're not listening to when the chwam and the koptu can't make it, then we're not paying attention. And they're telling us they are not surviving. And so what happened was in the 1900s, the Klamath Reclamation Project started. And this is where they took 220,000 acres and basically put canals and dikes, and they diverted all the water. So this is a wetland, clearly, and this is what it looks like later. It's no longer a wetland. And the project made room for farming. They started farming in the high desert. Does that sound familiar? High desert up here? So we should learn. That's my point. We should learn from what happened in the Klamath Basin and be aware of what could happen in the Deschutes Basin. But these farms support over 1,200 farmers. And these are families and these are people, and they are hardworking people. And they are struggling, just as the fish are. And they grow crops such as potatoes, onions. If you like In-N-Out burger fries, those are grown in the Klamath Basin. They are a major producer, and it's because they diverted the water. Over 7 dams went in. And I want us to historically remember the time frame that this happened in. Remember the Depression? President Roosevelt was bringing us out of the Depression by putting everybody to work. So we had the civilian conservation camps. We had the Works Project Administration. We were just trying to put people to work. And so I think decisions were made rapidly, definitely not thinking of 7 generations, but this is where these dams came from during this time period. Let's feed the country, because the country was starving. So the decisions seemed like good decisions at the time, but they didn't think generationally in what would happen. But there was somebody on June 1921, this is a quote from the local newspaper, along with it is the problem of whether the need for electricity ranks higher in the law than a food supply for the Indians. What does that mean? We're going to throw dams in the Columbia. The salmon can no longer get up to their traditional areas. And they knew this at the time. They knew this in 1921. And they weighed that factor. Is it more important to have power for the masses or to maintain the fish for the Native Americans? And that decision was made that it was more important to have the power. And so here's a picture, and this is a sacred place for the Klamath people. And this is Klamath Lake, and this used to be marshland. And here's an example of a road and a dike that was put in, no longer marshland. And this is where our fish live. This is a sacred place for the Klamath that has been completely reworked to now be more about irrigation. They may call this a wetland, but what is that really going to purify? Wetlands should be massive to purify the waters coming in. And this is an example. The Klamath River hosted the third largest salmon run. It was very productive salmon run, and that all went away. And again, what happens to our treaty right? Remember that Article 1? The fish, we retain that right to catch fish. Now our Twom and Koptu are endangered. We can't eat those. And for 93 years, our salmon haven't been able to come up the river to us. That treaty right is not being fulfilled with regards to those fish. And I never want to take the human face out of this. We grew up down in that valley. We have family in that valley. We played sports in the valley, in the basin. And these are hardworking people. And they are literally having their home wells go dry. Their property values are crashing. The cost of food is increasing drastically. And this was already a food desert. And so I don't want to forget that this is impacting people's lives in the basin. And it's also not just the fish that are suffering. This is the Tule Lake Wildlife Refuge. This is it in 2021. This is part of the Pacific Flyway. This is one of the biggest flyways in the United States and all of North America. Where are these birds going to find refuge? They're not. They're dying. And I'm not a scientist, but do we think that the bird flu could be correlated to birds not? Once an animal is under stress, then they're susceptible to disease. That's what they tell us about the salmon, the twom, the cockatoo. Do we not think the same thing happened to the birds? I believe so. And this is what this looks like. When you get down into it, there are 4 separate tribes. The Klamath, Hupa, Karuk, and Yurok are all along this Klamath River. There are 3 different endangered species. The salmon are on the threatened species list. There are 7 dams, and there's 6 wildlife refuges that all seek water from this river and this water system. That's in addition to all the farms. And so what's happening, and it's ironic that we've been working over water negotiations, and these negotiations are between power companies, Oregon, California, national governments, environmentalists, tribes, which are all independent nations. And we came to an agreement. And it kind of fell apart over the dams. It never got through Congress. But guess what's going out? The dams. The most contentious part of the whole entire agreement is the only thing that's stuck. And it comes down to money, and I'll get into that. But these 4 dams are now, this one, and this one, are all being removed starting this summer. And that's a wonderful, powerful thing. And the most ironic thing was we had this huge agreement penciled in, and it was the dams that prevented it from going through. And now the dams are the only things that are going down. And so I want to share this video because, again, I think it's important to get multiple Native perspectives in, and so that you can understand what's going on with the fish downriver. This is a video from the Karuk that describes what's going on with their fish.
Where rivers should be naturally fluctuating up and down, these dams are regulating the water flow towards one kind of stagnant flow. So it allows algae all along the bottom of the river to pop up and grow and just flourish. At times, the Klamath River and the reservoirs behind the Klamath dams can be thousands of times higher than the threshold that is recommended for humans to be in. So the water is toxic, extremely toxic. And then that water is in turn released down the Klamath River.
The state of California says that you're not supposed to drink it, you're not supposed to swim in it. If you let your animals drink it, they possibly die. You come out with sores.
It's just become a part of our norm, which it shouldn't be. And it's sad to see. It's disgusting.
For like the next generations to come, my kids or my kids' kids, to be able to swim and fish and not worry.
Another very serious impact that we believe dams are responsible for is some fish disease issues that we have in the river. One fish disease in particular that we're really concerned about is called Ceratinova shasta. We call it sea shasta. It's deadly to juveniles. 90% of the fish sampled have this disease. Another disease aspect that is exacerbated by dams is a fish disease that we study here in the lower river called ick. It's a parasite that attacks fish gills. Dams warm the water unnaturally, and so warm water can lead to delays in migration here on the lower river, and we can get congregations of fish, and congregations lead to stressed out adult Chinook salmon, and stressed fish are susceptible to diseases. Ick is responsible for the 2002 Klamath River fish kill, where we lost over 60,000 adult Chinook salmon as they were returning upstream here. The largest salmon die-off in United States history happened right here on the Klamath River.
It was the saddest part of my life. So we believe the fishes are relative. So we're here to take care of them like they take care of us.
So that's just what's happening with the salmon populations. It doesn't cover that they haven't been able to go for 93 years back up to their normal habitat. And so the dams are finally coming out. And that's going to open up over 420 miles of original habitat for these salmon. And it's going to bring salmon back to people like us. It's going to improve the water quality, because hopefully the water won't stay so warm, because it will be constantly moving. They said it's kind of like a bathtub. It just sits there and it's warm. What some of the downside is, there's a loss of hydropower. And I was like, well, how much is that? The 4 dams that are being removed on the Klamath contain 1.1% of California's water power. And so it's very insignificant. So the goodness of their heart, is that why they decided to remove these dams? No, always follow the money. It costs over $515 million to repair the dams. It costs $77 million a year for operation and maintenance. And it's going to cost $450 to remove them. So that's why that's the one part. The big sticking point was they wanted the state governments to take over the removal of the dams and the power companies to wash their hands of it. And that's what took so long. But that's why they're coming out. It's not to save fish. It's not. That's the upside for tribal people, for sports fishermen, for environmentalists. But it was that the power companies didn't want to pay the money that it would cost to make the dams qualify and work under today's standards. Because when they went in 1905, 1903, they didn't have the sort of regulations that we have today. And I love this quote by the Karuk chairman. And he says, "My dream is not only to bring back the salmon, but to bring back a way of life." And I think that's really important, because so much of our ceremony and our culture is tied to these foods. But something that my tribe has to consider, and when I say my tribe, all of us as a whole, you know, if you have company coming to visit you, you clean your house. I mean, if you have your mother-in-law coming or something, you make sure that looks spotless. We have these fish coming home, and they're not coming for a visit. We want them to come and stay. And our waterways and our streams are a mess right now. Our Tuam and Koptu are telling us they are a mess right now. And these fish are going to be coming home within the next couple years. And is our home worthy of them? And that's a sad thing for us to have to struggle with, because we've wanted this back for so long. But I don't know that our streams are worthy of these visitors to come home. And that's very hurtful, because like we say, these foods are so important to the health of our people. And so our tribe is working on doing restoration projects, and they're working with community partners. But what sets the Klamath tribe apart from the Warm Springs tribe is we don't have a land base. We can't go out and say, oh, we're going to fix this and do this on our land, because our land was taken in 1954. So we have to rely on community members to let us onto their land. And believe me, we're doing everything we can to buy back our land. And I think we're up to like 3,000 or 5,000 acres. It seems like a lot because we're so happy every time we get to do a purchase. But we originally had 22 million acres, and then we had a 2 million acre reservation. So, 3,000 to 5,000, even though it seems a lot to me, is nothing to people that grew up on that reservation. And a lot of times they're not waterfront properties where you do restoration activities. And our tribe is geared towards trying to purchase those pieces back so we can restore. But then we reach out to our neighbors and ask, hey, can we help do restoration projects on your property? And that's what the tribe's doing so that we can welcome those fish home and so that we can keep our Tuamanqaptu alive. And I'm going to go ahead and close with this video. It's not even out yet. This is a sneak peek. Let me pause this right quick and get out of this screen. But it's a young tribal member who, we started with our elder Louis Pitts from Warm Springs. And this young man, his name is Paul Wilson. And he uses his photography to spread awareness about issues. And one of the issues that he's spreading awareness about is the dam removal. And so Travel Oregon gave me permission to use this video and share it with you. But I think Paul hits on a lot of really important points.
This is one of the dams that we'll be removing starting this year. We're undergoing the largest dam removal in history. It's been over 100 years that these 4 large-scale hydroelectric dams have been on the Klamath River, and they're going to disappear. And so being able to share that story and bring people in to educate them about what this does to a river is really important. The dam's coming out for us, it means an entire world change. It means a reconciliation and hopefully a renaissance of our lifeways. It's such a pleasure to be able to share this place with other peoples that travel through here and come and see a beautiful sunset, see birds that you can't see anywhere else, to see crystal blue waters, open skies, marshlands, lakes. You're taking an experience, and so finding ways to give that balance, to find that balance, it's a trade with this place. And so being able to find ways to pick up your litter, to leave these places better than you found them, so that you're giving back to the place that's giving you that inspiration, that's taking care of your soul.
And I think for so many of us, that water does take care of our soul in a way that maybe we've taken for granted. But I love what Paul says about, being in relationship with it. And I think he's spot on, that each one of us can do that in our own way. And so that brings me to how we interact with water today. One, I think we all need to recognize we're in a high desert. We need to watch what's going on down the road from us and see what has happened and learn. And so whether that is with regards to how we do our irrigation, I am finally going to commit to bucking up and putting in a drip system in my garden. And I've been trying to do it forever, but I'm like, you know what? I got to stop talking about it. That's something I'm going to do to my commitment to water. But we also interact with water, like you see the people on the Deschutes. That's one of our main tourist draws into this area, and that's so they can interact with water. And so I think we can start with gratitude and just being grateful and humble for the vastness of the water that we have. And a colleague of mine, Owen Murphy at Central Oregon Community College, is working with multiple different groups to study how we do water in Central Oregon. because we have a use it or lose it system regarding our irrigation. And is that in line with good stewardship? In a drought year, it's probably not. So what if you want to donate backwater? Should that be an option without losing it? And so I think it's great that him and his students and multiple different groups in the community are looking into those sorts of issues that will change our relationship with water. And then some other things, if you would like to, the AMBO Fund. I told you that's the Klamath word for water. And our AMBO Fund goes directly to creating and maintaining habitat for our Tuam and Koptu. It also, the AMBO Fund, is where we get money to purchase back that land that is river facing. And then in Warm Springs, the chush is the Warm Springs word for water. They do not have clean drinking water in Warm Springs. Chush, thank you. That is a civil rights issue. You know, we all think that, oh, these issues happen so far away. But the Chush Fund, I believe it's I don't want to misquote it. To fix the water system up in Warm Springs is multi-millions of dollars. And they don't have clean drinking water. And so I like to put these up for people that would like to donate. Those are two things both done through Seeding Justice that help with relation to water. And then Moose Up Ketcha, thank you so much. I have the honor of having my cousin Smokey Miller here, and he's one of those people that I speak with water about. And he's taught me so much about the spiritual side of water. And then my cousin Brad Parrish, he's a water rights specialist for the tribe. And boy, did he give me some heavy documents. Because like I said, you know, we've been in litigation longer than I've been alive. This is extremely complex issue, and he was able to help me out, as were several other elders. And that's who I go to. A lot of times, you know, you think, oh, I can just Google information. But when it comes to tribal history and tribal information, that's not always readily available. And so you have to talk to your elders and your people to learn. And so I appreciate those that mentor me and help me to learn as I go. These were those specific, Paige will post this PowerPoint. But these are some of the videos and projects that Warm Springs has done regarding river restoration. And they work with a local film company in town named Wahoo Films that has done some amazing projects that show you exactly what they're doing over time lapses. Because these projects, you just don't go out and, you know, plant a tree and call it done. These take 10, 15 years. And so they've been filming these over this time period, and it's amazing to see what they have done. And then I've pulled from multiple different sources. I would highly recommend the film A River Between Us. It talks specifically about the water issues in the Klamath Basin from multiple perspectives, the ranchers, the tribes. And it came out in 2015 when we were really close to an agreement. And so it ends on this wonderful, powerful note. And then the filmmaker didn't know that it all fell apart, and it's more hostile down there than it's ever been. But it's an excellent film. There's multiple different documentaries in here. And then I always have to give a shout out to the Senate Bill 13 curriculum and videos that the Klamath Tribes has that is now being taught in our schools. Like I was at Bend High last week teaching boarding schools. And so it's a really powerful thing to rewrite that history that's been ignored for so long. But I thank you for your time and for being here and for learning about water. And remember, we just skimmed the surface, pun intended. Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir.
So you talked about opening up the Klamath River for the salmon to be able to get back to their home waters. Mm-hmm. They've been unable to do that for 93 mm-hmm. years. And so I'm wondering, is there still an intuitive sense of them going up the river, say we're free to go up now?
So Native people believe in a thing called blood memory. It doesn't matter how long you're disconnected, it will come back to you. And we've seen that with things like Native language. And remember, I'm not the scientist, but I show up to the tribal council meetings. And I got to hear Dr. Alex Gagne, the tribe's senior biologist. And they redid a fish habitat for the Chiloquin that the Chiloquin had not been in. And I don't want to say 100 years, but at least a generation. And those fish went right back there. And he said there's something in their DNA that will call them back. And so he was just as surprised because he's a scientist. It doesn't make sense. And you know, the scientists can't document the blood memory. The library actually brought Diane Wilson out last year. And she's from the Dakotas back east, and she does a lot of research regarding corn and seeds. And she was doing a seed planting. And they were planting some green corn. And one of the little girls said, well, this is how we do the green corn dance, and got up and sang a song and did the dance. That song and that language had been gone for over 100 years. How did she know that there was a dance and there was a song for when you sort the green corn? And so you can't explain it. The world is bigger than black and white. And there's a spiritual element. Don't look at me, Smokey. So this is a lot of what Smokey and I talk about that we just don't discuss. And my cousin, Brad, he goes out with the fish and wildlife biologists and the tribal biologists, and they get these Chiloquin, and they're at the end of their life. They're 30 to 40 years old. And they go out in the streams, and they sneak on them at night, real native-like. And he goes out in the streams, and he catches more fish than everybody else. And he says, sometimes they're rough with the fish, and I don't like it. When I get those fish, I just take what she's willing to give me. And the fish go to Brad. So is that because they know that he's never going to take more than she's willing to give? Is there a relationship there that we don't see? And you know, I hesitate to even tell that story because we're like, oh, she's crazy. But how do you explain why Brad gets the most fish? But it's because he sees them differently and he treats them differently, and they sense that and they know that. And you know, I've grown up around horses, and horses sense and horses know. You know, and so I do think there's when you start to look at the world as more than just the black and white and look beyond, I think that's there. And I think those fish will be able to find their way home. And if I had the exact scientific report that Alex was able, but Alex was surprised. He's like, they just went right there. They knew right where to go. And it was a great thing because that was a restoration project that we had done that had been closed off to them, off to those Chiloquin. And they were able to return home in that aspect. So, yeah, do you have a question?
Yeah, how come, I don't understand why Warm Springs doesn't have good water. I mean, it seems like it should be priority number one for the state to take care of that.
I think the misconception there is that the state cares. This tribes don't fall under state jurisdiction. So it should be priority number one for the federal government. The federal government has sworn to us via our treaty to protect us and to keep us safe and to take care of us. So it should be the federal government's priority, and it is not. The state doesn't have, you know, a relationship with the tribe to have to step in and do something, but the federal government does. I can tell you that the Navajo reservation has worse water than Flint, Michigan, and nobody knows and nobody cares. And it's the federal government's responsibility. We gave you this land, and you said you would take care of everything. If you're not going to take care of it, then give it back. And then we'll have enough money to take care of it ourselves. Or we'll just move to someplace that has clean water. But that water issue in Warm Springs, I don't want to simplify it because they do know what it takes to fix it. I think there's literally like clay piping is how old this water is up there. And so they have to redo the whole entire infrastructure. And projects do happen. We just don't hear about them. Right now, under the new infrastructure bill, houses in Navajo country are getting power that have never had power. We're just so far behind in Indian country that we have a lot to make up, but it would be the federal government that should step in. We have a treaty right that says that we should have access to these sorts of things. Anything for our well-being is how the treaty reads. And I believe water is for our well-being. And I don't want to misquote it, but I want to say it's like $200 million to fix the water problem. Is it 300 million? See, that's why thanks, Geneva. $300 million to fix the water problem in Warm Springs. So yeah. And I do believe that's the federal government's responsibility to fix it. Native Americans are under the Bureau of Department of Interior. And so that's who, and Deb Holland's here this week. Maybe somebody should go say something to her. Because believe it, yeah, she's in Ben Bush tomorrow? I didn't know that. You better go talk to Deb Smokes. But yeah, she'll be here, and that's her department. She is our first ever Native American as the Secretary of the Interior. And you know, she came to where the dams were being pulled out. And so she is doing things. She started a boarding school initiative. She has a different set of priorities than other people who have been in that office, which is great. But again, it's how far behind we are to where we would just trying to play catch up. But I hope that's one of the issues that's raised with Deb Holland when she's here. Well, thanks for coming out on a Thursday evening. Thank you.